I'm Michael Brown, and welcome to The Unpopular View. I've wanted to engage with Gen Z since I started this podcast back in January, but have yet to do so. That changes today. Everyone has an opinion about the much-discussed Gen Z. Most of those opinions come from people who aren't even in it, and many of the stereotypes I have a feeling may not be representative of the entire generation, particularly of Gen Z members coming from other countries. Recently, given political shift in the past few years, we also talk a lot about what Europeans think of America, given controversies over defense spending, the Ukraine and Russia, and foreign wars, and even Greenland of all places. Usually we do this without one in the room, one meaning a European. My guest today is both Gen Z and European. Armin Sumansky is a second-year student at Bates College in Maine, triple majoring in economics, politics, and European studies. He's from the Czech Republic, a country where the memory of Soviet domination is a family memory to most, not a history chapter. Next year, Armin will be at the London School of Economics, and I hope we can learn about that plan as well when we get to episode 2. So Armin's looking at the United States from inside it as a Gen Z European. He's also looking at Russia and the rest of Europe from a place that Americans should be curious to pay attention to. In this segment, segment 1, we will cover what Gen Z actually means, if anything, why an American college for Armin, how Armin's family's history impacts how he reads Russia, the Ukraine, and Europe now, and given his aspiration to someday work on public policy issues, whether President Trump accidentally forced a correction on European defense that Europe actually needed. Welcome, Armin, and let's get started.
It's a pleasure. Thank you.
Okay. So I'd like to start with the framing of Gen Z, okay? When people say Gen Z thinks X, does that ring true for you, or does it flatten a generation that's actually pretty split about lots of different issues? And is there any one issue you think your generation genuinely agrees on? And I'll give you just a short list of possible things you could speak to. Peace, war, AI, wealth inequality, climate change, social issues, jobs. And then finally, just, this one is a bit worthy of unbundling. Does government suck? So take it away.
Yeah, great questions. I think it absolutely flattens an entire generation. I always hear Gen Z thinks this, right? But my reaction to that is like, which Gen Z? I would argue that my generation is probably more fragmented than many previous generations. And as a Czech and a European, I certainly don't see like one set of unified opinions among young people. I think a big part of that is social media, right? Previous generations still had a much more shared media environment in a way. Today, two people can like essentially live in the same city, be the same age, go to the same university, and still consume completely different information every single day, right? Those algorithms that drive those social media platforms, they push them into very specific communities and spheres of influence. Over time, those spaces do become echo chambers. They amplify certain fringe viewpoints and can often make people feel like their corner of the internet represents a large part of society when in reality it doesn't. And that's just within one country, right? In Czechia alone, there are dozens of different online communities sharing people's views, many of which barely interact with each other. Having said that, though, I do think that there is one issue that comes to mind that genuinely does unite a large part of my generation, and that's the cost of living crisis, or wealth inequality can be bundled into that as well. I think this is true in Czechia, across Europe. And honestly, I've noticed much of the same rhetoric as well in the United States too. Young people are seeing housing become much less affordable. Wages are struggling to keep up, rising costs, and major life milestones are just being pushed further, right? People are just not sure. I'm unsure whether I'll be able to have children or if buying a home will be, I hope so, but, or if buying homes will be something that I'll be able to do.
Yeah.
And I think that like shared economic anxiety explains a lot of what we're seeing also like politically as well.
Yeah.
Many young people are becoming attracted to anti-establishment populist movements, whether those movements come from the political left or the political right. Yeah. So I think that's one issue I would say Gen Z broadly agrees on. It's that the economic model isn't working particularly well for young people right now. But I would also say that Gen Z is definitely not unified on what should be done about it.
So two questions come to mind. That's great as a introductory statement. Some people argue that with all these sprawling algorithms, impacting our life on a nanosecond basis, that's a good thing because it enables the diversity of opinion to be shared across many different communities that in fact exist. But that also dilutes from a greater community. So it's like you mentioned, I say the Czech Republic, you say Czechia because I
you can use both.
Okay, yeah. Great. So I'm politically correct on that. Thank you. So, in Czechia, even in the same city, different people can have, be looking at different things and be living a mile away from each other. And maybe that's a good thing. Maybe it's a bad thing. But the one thing everybody is agreeing on is, the issue of, affordability or unaffordability or wealth inequality, whatever. Do you see that in particular as something that's, so there's two questions. Is this diversity of voices a good thing? Because I'm not sure, listening to you, whether you think it's a good thing or a bad thing, number one. And then number two, is it different in Czechia in terms of the pessimism? Because the vibe that I'm getting from you is it's a little bit on the pessimistic side versus the optimistic side, especially when you say you're not sure you're going to be able to have any children or have a house.
Yeah, I think diversity of voice is certainly a good thing. However, the algorithms that exist on social media are not created in a way to share that diversity among different communities, right? They're created in a way to keep one opinion in a bubble, in a so-called echo chamber. And the majority of people in those echo chambers rarely, maybe sometimes, but rarely kind of like break out of it to see different opinions, which perhaps wasn't the case when, at least in Europe, when you would have a lot of public broadcasters or newspapers, which would perhaps have more objectivity to them, and they wouldn't be driving people into different corners. So I would say there is a lot of diversity of opinion. It just constrains people into specific bubbles. Now, as for the pessimism part, I do think that young people are certainly more pessimistic. I mean, I mentioned only cost of living crisis, but there's a number of other issues, right? There is climate change. Europe has just gone through the worst heat waves it has seen ever in recorded history. It was over 110 degrees Fahrenheit in my city, which is just unprecedented, right? Wildfires all across Europe. So this is something that's going to continue to get worse, and it's something that's also deepening that anxiety. I'm sure we're going to discuss later also migration issues and other political issues that are taking place in Europe. So yeah, I would say there is definitely a more pessimistic mood, even though Gen Z technically has much higher living standards, right, than people did 20 or 30 years ago, for sure. Right, definitely me as someone who now lives in a capitalist country as opposed to my father who grew up in a socialist one.
Right.
And you mentioned why if I think governments suck. Well, I don't think that personally. I think there's many good government models that exist across Europe and across the world. However, that might not be the broad theme or broad opinion of Gen Z, because we can see that they are, as I mentioned earlier, voting for a lot of anti-establishment parties, populist parties who seek to uproot these elites and this government, or the swamp, as they sometimes call it, to bring something new.
Right. So before we move on to the next question, I mean, we could talk about just this first introductory question, for the entire for 60 minutes, but we'll move on. But before we do, it's sort of sounding like you're saying the algorithm, and I refer to, the algorithms as, just the social media / the algorithms. They're kind of neutering that diversity of opinion that exists to create echo chambers so that the net result is a net negative versus a positive. Is that fair? Yeah. But does Gen Z think that, or is that just you?
I think most of Gen Z doesn't realize it. Like, I've been in echo chambers as well, and it's taken a lot of discussions with people around me who have changed my opinion or shown me that I was in an echo chamber.
Right.
It's something that's difficult to notice.
Right.
Obviously, these social media platforms have an incentive to keep you in that echo chamber. There are studies that show that, rage or anger or like frustration keep you on these platforms for longer, right? So they show you opinions that cater to your beliefs rather than show you something diverse that might change your beliefs.
Right. Rage baiting. And
Sure.
I actually, when I started this podcast, I actually specifically was trying to get out of rage baiting and try and do something, that would avoid rage baiting. But it turns out when you avoid rage baiting, people don't really want to watch your podcast.
Yep.
So it's a bit of a conundrum on that one. Okay. Let's move to the next question. What do older generations get wrong about what Gen Z actually cares about?
Yeah, it's a great question. I mean, I think older generations may sometimes get wrong is that they sometimes interpret maybe Gen Z behavior without looking at the economic environment behind it, right? It's maybe back to my previous answers. I mean, I've heard many stereotypes, such as young people are financially irresponsible. I mean, I've heard something somewhat similar from my father as well. I mean, they spend too much on travel, they buy too many coffees, they don't save enough money. I think it's quite a heavy oversimplification. I mean, if you look at many of the traditional milestones that previous generations expected, those goals have become much harder to achieve for many young people. Therefore, they naturally become like less influential in your day-to-day decision making. So, I mean, there's even an economic concept called the lipstick effect, right? The idea that during difficult economic periods, people often stop spending on major purchases and instead spend more on smaller, more affordable pleasures, be that travel, going out with friends, buying a nice meal, anything of that sort. So I think when older sorry, go on.
No, I was just curious. How many lattes do you drink a day?
I don't drink any. I don't drink coffee. Yeah. So I haven't gone to that stage yet, luckily.
Okay. So what's your beverage of choice?
I just drink water. Yeah, that's it.
You must be pretty healthy. Okay.
Yeah.
Right. All right. So it sort of sounds, I have some teenage kids too. It sort of sounds like us old people, kind of really don't understand, from that economic context that you referred to, sort of the anxiety levels maybe that Gen Z are feeling, which then sort of leads to that lipstick, or
effect,
for some people, the latte is not you, or maybe it's bottled water. I don't know, or maybe you drink out of the tap. I don't know. But in any case, behaviors that let's call them boomers for some people, because I'm in that generation, but Gen X, even possibly even millennials, I don't know, might think that they're irresponsible on the side of Gen Z. So, I mean, are you feeling? I guess my question would be: are you feeling that there is kind of a generational split that is almost antagonistic because these older generations don't really get, the anxiety, the merited anxiety levels that Gen Z is feeling because of the economic context that's so difficult when Gen Z looks into the future because they're living in the present and they understand what's happening?
I think it can be antagonistic. It depends where, though, right? Like, I wouldn't maybe put this into the context of my country, Czech Republic, right? Because, like, for example, my parents had a much, much more difficult upbringing than I did, right? In a socialist nation, and they did not have many of the luxuries and pleasures I have. So I'm not sure it's that applicable there. To those countries which have long-term, like, or come from countries with like a long-term market-driven economy, I think there it is applicable that people are kind of angry that maybe the older generation went through the golden age of capitalism and kicked the ladder, on the way up, kicked the ladder down on the way up, and it's difficult for those younger generations to rise to those same levels. Now, that's not like I'm sure some young people can break out and get there, but it's just more difficult for younger generations to achieve those levels of financial independence and buying all those things. So, yeah, I would say there is a bit of an antagonistic attitude. I mean, the stats back it up as well, right? Young people in Europe are frustrated that now the average age of buying a home has grown dramatically. It used to be 25, just 25 years ago, 25 to 26, depending on which country you're in. Now, by the time you pay off your mortgage and everything, usually it's in between 40 and 55. Yeah, which is ridiculous. I mean, which is what the expected age of the young generation of when they're going to buy their home.
So, sorry, when you say pay off their mortgage, you mean pay off their student debt or something?
No, I mean pay off the mortgage on their homes, right? Is that according to stats, basically, young people are going to be paying off their homes 10 to 15 years later than the previous generation did.
But when are they buying their homes?
they're buying their homes at a later age as well, like usually in their 30s, right? So they're all obviously paying them off later, but they're also buying them later because they might not have enough for the down payment because of the skyrocketing like housing prices.
Because if they could pay it off by the time they're 45, I'd say that's remarkable, because I'm still paying off a 30-year mortgage. I mean, it's like, we work on 30-year mortgages, primarily. They used to be the variable rate thing that was very big, but now with interest, anyway, that's a whole other conversation we don't need to get into. But I sort of get that insecurity thing. Okay, let's go to the next question. This one sort of gets back to what we've already been talking about. It's about optimism and pessimism. And, figuring out how to, generalize on the one hand and then unbundle it on the other so that we can have a sensible conversation about it. It sounds to me, based on everything you said, that, I hate to say it, there's a bit more pessimism / maybe realism than optimism per se. And just from speaking from an American standpoint, from one who's in an older generation, when I look at the $40 trillion plus debt that the United States has, that we now believe that we will never be able to get out of, and China owns much of that debt, I just don't. It's very hard to see how there can be, on the one hand, more social programs, and then on the other hand, we've got this, growing on a daily basis, almost, wealth inequality, and to my knowledge, we only have one trillionaire in terms of an individual on the planet right now, but we're probably going to have a few more, before too long, right? And they're all, probably, affiliated with AI companies, or, and we'll see if that's sustainable or not. But in any event, it's really hard to see how one can get out of it. So if you could just, we'll sort of wrap up this, this segment, with that. Well, actually, we're not going to wrap up the segment because we have a few more to go, but with this set of questions on that, and then we'll move on to why American base.
I don't have all the solutions. I've outlined a couple problems. I would say that in the US in particular, a lot of the issues have been that the middle class has been almost abandoned, right? Post World War II in the United States is when you had this like golden age of capitalism, where you had the GI programs where students could attend university. It was very accessible. They could get accessible loans on homes as well. And it enabled them to kind of break through and form this very strong American middle class. And also you had rich people in the US who until the 70s were taxed very heavily, right? At a point during the Second World War, the tax rate was over 90%, right? And up until the 70s, it was around 70%, and then Reagan slashed them.
Yeah, so, correct.
And a lot of, we can look at a lot of the trends or negative trends of how strong the middle class has been go progressively down after that period in the 80s, where there have not been as many social programs. There has been more government. A lot of those programs have been cut, and government spending has been redirected to other things. So nowadays, you have a very bloated budget in the U.S. on the military, right? I think it's over $1 trillion, and they're trying to raise it to $1.5 trillion. But
on a percentage basis, it's actually less.
Of course,
it's actually less.
It's like 4.5%, of course. But then you also have very bloated like budgets on Medicare, right, or medical costs, where an average per capita, the U.S. spends double on healthcare costs than in any other developed country in the world.
Right.
So there's a couple of these issues.
I hear you. But what's interesting is, so that middle class, the middle class back in the day was not living off government money per se, because we were paying. In fact, like you're absolutely correct. The tax rates were high, and there was this strong middle class, and it was something I think the middle class over the last 20 years has lost about 10 to 15 percentage points. And a lot of those 10 to 15 percentage points, those have transformed into homeless people that are living on the streets of, Skid Row in LA or wherever. I mean, we have a big homelessness problem. I know in Lewiston, when we visited up there, where you're at base, it's like, there's a lot of tough things that you see, especially in the state of Maine, beautiful state, but unfortunately there's a bit of homelessness. But there were jobs. I mean, people were working in factories. This whole business about Ohio, Michigan, Wisconsin, these places. I went to school in Wisconsin, so I know that state a bit better. But it's like there was a gutting of manufacturing jobs, from the 1980s on, and accelerated under, in fact, the Clinton administration with NAFTA and so forth. So this thing is complex, but
Of course.
it's not just about government spending. I mean, when Bill Clinton was president too, we had a budgetary surplus instead of, annual deficits and debt. So there's a lot of fictions around Republicans managing the economy better, and what government can and cannot do or should do for people. But something has happened where we've gutted, a lot of the workforce and the ability for people to actually have, jobs that enable a vibrant middle class. And I'm not sure how, with what's going on with AI, we're going to get out of that myself. But in any event, let's end this section here and let's go to Bates. So why America? Why did you decide to come to the United States, and why did you decide on Bates? What's choosing an American college say about how you actually see this country versus Czechia or Europe?
Yeah. So, there were a number of reasons. First and foremost, I wanted to study abroad, get an international education, just get some exposure to different cultures and different educational curricula, right? I know that I do not want to live or work, not long-term, in the Czech Republic. So I viewed gaining this education as something like quite essential to me. I mean, I applied to over 25 schools in total, 18 of them only in the United States. As for Bates, it stood out not only because of its academic rigor, but also because of a lot of the personal connections I made with the admissions officer, with a lot of students and professors before I applied to the institution.
Nice.
I felt much more of a connection. And that's the second part of your question as to like how I see this country. I mean, look, I've always really admired the United States in so many different respects. I think it is truly a great nation. I mean, sure, it has its share of problems and misperfections, but which country doesn't? I mean, my country has plenty of issues as well. Yeah, it's never really black and white, and I can speak for myself saying that I've had like a truly wonderful experience studying in the U.S. this past year. So yeah, I mean, like the hospitality and kindness I've been shown by many of the Americans is only something like I can wish to repay if they ever visit my country. Not to mention all the opportunities I have here. Now, one more thing I'll say is that saying that I've certainly had to confront some of the biases I've had in the U.S. For example, I noticed a lot of young Europeans saying that they believe Americans are fake nice or fake kind, like in their daily interactions.
Right.
For a while, I had this opinion as well, but now with my experience, granted only in the Northeast of the United States, I think it's false. It's definitely a huge cultural difference here, where something I love about the country, people will smile at you and greet you, will lend you a helping hand. I mean, in my country, you'll be hard pressed to find strangers treating you kindly or with joy, like they have done to me in the U.S. A lot of people are quite grumpy. Maybe this is a bit of the Soviet remnants or remnants of Soviet history, but yeah.
So it sounds like that was my next question about what you've come to appreciate in this country that would surprise people back in Czechia. It sounds like you've already answered that question. But has anything complicated your view of the United States, or you're just finding your view actually getting better?
I mean, of course, I may have some like policy disagreements with the state or federal government, but that is something I'm always going to have regardless of who's in power. I mean, it certainly doesn't change my overall opinion of the U.S., at least not drastically.
Right.
Because it is ordinary people I engage with on a day-to-day basis that like make me still have hope for this country. And I am staying in the U.S. over the summer break, so I definitely like it here a lot.
We appreciate it.
Yeah.
Yeah, thanks. All right, let's move on to Czech history and Russia. Your parents' or grandparents' generation lived through the Soviet bloc in Czechoslovakia. How much does that history shape how seriously you and your Czech peers take Russian expansion into Europe today?
Yeah, they did live through communist Czechoslovakia. It affected them very heavily, of course. I mean, my father grew up, as I said, with not even a fraction of the resources I have today.
Right.
It's truly a remarkable difference. So he still remembers when he was 10 years old in 1968, waking up at 5 a.m. and seeing the Russian troops and tanks rolling by to crush the Prague Spring. Yeah, so these events were, of course, told to me numerous times during my upbringing. So I personally take the threat of Russian expansion very seriously. Many of us in Eastern and Central Europe know that this recent Russian war against Ukraine is just one event in a much broader trend of Russian imperialism against its neighbors, be that Georgia, Ukraine, Moldova, or others.
Mhm.
And there is a reason, obviously, that these nations have taken a strong pro-Western position and joined NATO as soon as they could after the Soviet bloc fell apart. We all genuinely feel the threat just a few hundred miles away. Yeah, and you mentioned my Czech peers in that question. Let's say aged between 16 and 24. Those Czech peers are overwhelmingly in support of Ukraine in its fight against Russian expansion. Polling in Czechia has shown that 62% of young people in that age category support Ukraine, while only 7% approximately of the entire population openly support Russia. So these are mostly older Czechs that support Russia, often on the far left or far right, who perhaps reminisce of like their days of their youth under Russian influence. And there's also a good chunk that's apolitical. So yeah, I mean, some young Czechs don't have that traumatic experience of my father's generation, but most are still skeptical of Russia and cherish independence and democracy, which we have and which we fought for.
So it sounds like, just to finish this little mini segment here of our conversation, it sounds like what happened in '68 and the history prior to that under the Soviet Union, that hasn't gone away. If anything, is it fair to say it's amplifying now for Gen Z in Czechia?
Definitely. I mean, I would say that Gen Z was certainly more open to Russia before 2022, right? Like, I mean, a lot of Czechs, we were hugely reliant on gas and oil exports from Russia, right? So we had a more like business-friendly approach. But I mean, a lot of Czechs have seen Russia return to its just roots of imperialism and just to threaten its neighbors, and they know that Ukraine falls, right? Soon it will be Slovakia, soon it will be us, right? We're just next on the chopping block. We're part of this larger Slavic sphere, yeah, which Russian rhetoric constantly says that they want us back in this like larger Russian empire. So it's definitely something that's been like revived in the Czech psyche.
Yep. Okay, now let's move on to another topic, American politics up close. So, what have you actually observed at Bates and nearby campuses about how Americans argue politics? What's sayable, meaning what can be said, what isn't, and how much of it is just performative?
Yeah, I mean, at Bates specifically, I would say that I'm sure people, like as we know, like higher education, especially liberal arts colleges, Ivy Leagues, are dominated by people on the American liberal side. You can say, right? So people who are conservatives, I'm sure, at many of these institutions have at least felt that they have to self-censor to prevent criticism, which is sad. I don't think that should be a reality at a higher education. We should be listening to each other's opinions.
Right.
Now, at Bates, the atmosphere has been quite muted. I mean, they do have different organizations like for different issues. Like we do have, for example, a Students' Justice for Palestine or Student Action, something of that sort. But yet, in my 1 year here, I've yet to see a single event or protest or march or anything of that sort organized by them or by the pro-Israeli side either. I mean, I'm sure the student body is very opinionated, but it's curious that there's very little political activism on campus.
That's interesting. Right? Yeah. That is
and
interesting.
As for other colleges, it may differ a bit. I would say this is a trend among smaller liberal arts colleges. Like I've heard at Bowdoin, there has been a Bowdoin College in Maine, there have been a few events,
right,
or a few protests take place, but we've mainly seen this limited to larger institutions like Columbia, Harvard, UPenn, right? More of the Ivy Leagues. And there you even had the government getting involved, right? The administration, which threatened to pull funding because of some of these like activist movements. So yeah, it really varies campus by campus.
Do you think government should get involved in any way in terms of stifling or encouraging debate, if it's debate, or is this the politicization of college life that shouldn't be happening?
I think government should maybe strongly encourage for institutions like Bates and others to adopt a policy of institutional neutrality.
Mm.
As well as there is a college act called like the Chicago Free Speech Rights Act or something like that, where colleges make policies and declare that students will not face repercussion for their political views. In some ways, some people might call this idea maybe a little bit libertarian. I'm not sure. I think people should have the right to express their views no matter what, and government should get involved in ensuring that, especially at colleges which receive federal funding.
Right. And what about how does the college experience here in the United States compare with Czechia or other European universities in terms of political activism, let's say?
Yeah, I mean, I must say that, like, with exception to maybe like Czechia and Hungary, quite coincidentally, a lot of these campuses in Europe, right, have also been heavily politicized, right? These bigger institutions. There have been a lot of protests. There's been a lot of activism. There's been less government, like maybe repercussion on like the federal level in those European countries. But those are protests and movements that are happening to this day, and they're very active. Like my girlfriend, she studies at Maastricht University in the Netherlands. She tells me that all the time there are protests and movements happening there for these different like organizations. Now, I said with exception of Czechia and Hungary, that's because in the Czech Republic and in Hungary, there haven't been that many movements in relation to like Israel and Palestine, for example. Right? Those two countries are staunch supporters of Israel, and they have been for decades. One of remaining handful on the international stage, like alongside the U.S. So you haven't seen really much of that in the Czech Republic, but you've maybe seen more pro-Ukrainian movements, right? Where there's been like marches for Ukraine, or there have been issues related to democratic backsliding. A lot of protests have been happening. So again, even like the types of protests and activism that happens varies dependent on the region you're in, right?
Is there an easy answer to why Czechia and Hungary have been supportive of Israel? Just out of curiosity.
I can't speak to Hungary because I'm not sure what the history is there. For Czechia, though, yes, there is. So during the times of Czechoslovakia in 1947, 1948, when Israel as a state was being created, there was an arms embargo placed by many countries on Israel. And the Czechoslovakia was the only country which broke the arms embargo and actually shipped weapons and planes to Israel. And in many Israeli journals, Israel credits its survival against the Arab nations, which declared war in 1948 later, to Czechoslovak weapons, right, which arrived just in time. So there's been like this very strong bond, which was then kind of cut off by the communist government when they saw that Israel wouldn't turn to a more socialist leaning.
Right.
But it was kind of restarted after the Velvet Revolution in Czechoslovakia.
Is there a large Jewish population in Czechia?
Not at all. Not at all. Very, very small. It is fascinating. I'm sure there's many case studies on that. Yeah.
That's really interesting. Okay. Now, let's move on to the last topic in this segment. It's about EU defense spending and how that jives with current administration policies under President Trump. Is Europe genuinely converging on a stronger defense posture since 2022, or is that overstated? And how much of the shift, if it has been, is Russia-driven versus doubts about U.S. reliability and domestic EU politics?
Yeah, I mean, quite a few questions to unpack there.
Sorry.
No worries at all. I can manage it. So I would say Europe absolutely is converging to a harder defense posture. I think it's difficult to deny that at this point. I mean, since 2022, we've seen Finland and Sweden abandon decades of military non-alignment and join NATO, right? We've seen defense spending increases, right? NATO nations pledging to reach 5% of GDP by 2035, which is almost reaching the Cold War levels, right? And new EU defense initiatives, right? Like European countries create formats for coordinating on Ukraine outside of those traditional NATO structures. And let's not forget also UK, right? They left the European Union, but they're not any less European from a security perspective. So though having said that, I do believe that this convergence is to some degree overstated. I mean, there's many who talk about the possibilities of joint procurement, development, or even an EU army, right, at some point in the future. I think those proposals are very, very far away.
Right.
good example I can mention about how it has worked is FCAS 6th generation fighter program between France, Germany, and Spain. That was presented as a symbol of European defense integration, but also as a symbol of how difficult it actually was to integrate. Even those close allies disagree on so many things: industrial policy, technology transfers, leadership, so many. And ultimately, that program fell apart after disagreements between Germany and France. Right. So, yes, Europe is becoming more serious about defense, but I wouldn't confuse that with like increased political or military unification. It's really like sticky. I mean, it's something to definitely follow. Now, you mentioned the domestic. What's driving it? I'll just quickly answer that. I don't think it's possible to separate Russia from the U.S. I mean, Russia created the threat by invading Ukraine, but without U.S. reliability in question, there would have been a much weaker incentive to build a stronger continental defense. So domestic politics. So yeah, there's that. And then for domestic politics, as I kind of alluded to a little bit earlier, they're pulling in the other direction. I mean, we won't see a united European defense so long as the electorates are just too proud to abandon their national thinking for a more pan-European one.
So, great answer. Just to rapidly close up this question, so is it then somewhat ironic that President Trump's sort of forcing the hand of Europe to, up its game, up its defense spending? Is that a net good thing in your view, or what?
Yeah, absolutely. I think it was something like that was a long time coming, right? Presidents before Trump as well, be that Obama, Biden, Bush, and others, like they all pushed for increased defense cooperation, defense like involvement and spending from their European allies. Trump used more unconventional means to do it, but it worked, right? In his remarks, he made it seem as if the U.S. or as if Europe was ripping the U.S. off, which wasn't true. Since the U.S. was getting a ton out of the arrangement, right? Defense contracts, influence, reach around the globe, and so on. But yeah, from a European perspective, spending more defense was necessary, and Trump was the person who kind of forced them to do that.
Right.
It was difficult to sell to the electorate, but Trump gave them an excuse to do so, and good for Europe. Yeah.
So we'll end this segment on this question, but usually, at least from a United States perspective, spending on defense and the military is considered to be a very conservative / Republican type, thing. Whereas in reality, Democratic administrations have had very healthy defense spending too, but it's the narrative is usually, so this is a Republican thing and Democrats are weak. But let's put that to the side because I think that's not really backed up by the evidence. But is it the case that European Gen Z people are then a bit actually quite conservative when it comes to the military spending issue and because of the threat of Russia? Or do you see Gen Z in Europe as having kind of a healthy balance between that, the necessity for military spending and social issues writ large, which can include climate change and whatever else you want to throw in?
It really depends, right? If you look at the former Eastern Bloc, certainly, right? I would say that even the parties, in many of the former Eastern Bloc countries, you don't have like a strong left wing in general, right? It's you have mainly like centrist, center left, and like right wing parties.
Yeah.
And even those center left parties, it depends on the country, but even those are pretty strong on their defense commitments. Take Poland, for example. There's a centrist government, and they're spending almost 4% of GDP now on defense. Right. So there definitely has been a shift to more conservative opinions about defense in the Eastern Bloc. However, if you look at countries in Western Europe, like, I don't know, take Luxembourg, for example, right? Like these are places, or Belgium, or these are places where increased defense spending is still very much center-right and more right-wing issue. Maybe in some countries, some of the like centrist parties, but mostly right-wing. Look at one example to look at is Spain, left-wing government, which has for a long time refused to hit the 2% NATO mark or go further beyond that. Yeah, they've been very much lacking in their defense obligations to NATO. So, yeah, I would say there definitely is this like shift among Gen Z to the right when it comes to defense spending. But then again, more to the left when it comes to other things like climate change, like you mentioned.
Right. Okay. So that's going to be the last question in this segment. Thank you for tuning into this episode of The Unpopular View. If you enjoyed this conversation, please subscribe to our YouTube channel, The Unpopular View with Michael Brown, to watch the full video version of the show. If you want to listen on the go, you can find the audio version of today's show on all major podcast platforms, including Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and Amazon Music. For more updates and behind-the-scenes content, follow us on Instagram at The Unpopular View. Subscript Michael Brown. M. Brown, thanks for watching.
Thank you for having me.